Hi class. I wanted to give you some guidance on the evidence-based practice project within this course since I've gotten a couple of questions. So you'll see on my screen I have the assignments tab open up here, and I want to inform you that you will want to read the assignments closely for best directions. So the first project that's due for this evidence-based practice project is developing the PICO question. You guys learned to develop PICO questions last semester, so I didn't review that in detail, but if you need help with that, and once you've read the assignment, I'm more than happy to help you plug in those components if the whole group can meet with me. So then I want to point out that there are other components of that assignment. So the written report, and then you'll do a group presentation. All of those components, so you'll also see a self and peer evaluation. So you'll evaluate yourselves as a group. So anything with the EBP project on the title is comprised of within that assignment, and everything but the PICO question will be due after the presentations. But I do need you to develop your PICO questions to get you moving forward on that project. So I'm going to open up the written report assignment and just talk about it. So within your chosen group, remember I asked you to work within your clinical groups, about 3 to 5 of you, no more than 5 of you, no less than 3 of you, please. I want you to identify a policy that you've observed, read about, or participated in within the past 6 months that you'll review according to evidence-based practice guidelines. So you're going to discover and critique the best available evidence or literature that you can apply as a nursing intervention in the practice setting. Remember, evidence-based practice takes evidence, clinical practice, and patient preference. So you're going to need to consider all of those. And then you're going to determine whether the policy is backed by evidence and is it appropriate for the setting in which it is used. So ideally, you're going to evaluate what is being done according to the literature and say, this institution's policy is right on track, or there's some changes that might need to be made, and then we'll maybe develop ways to implement those as you move forward in the program. Each student needs to contribute a minimum of 2 current journal or peer-reviewed professional references to this project. So if you're a group of 3, you would need 6 literature sources. And remember, we talked about the levels of evidence. So I want high levels of evidence for these policies. Here's the thing with that, though. I don't want you to critique something that is a clinical practice guideline or an evidence-based practice guideline or a bundle of care. So that would be like the sepsis bundle or the CLABSI bundle or the CAUTI bundle. Those bundles of care are evidence-based practice. Those have been developed by experts, and so there is nothing we can do that would contribute to changing those types of policies, okay? At some point in our careers, definitely we will contribute to that stuff. But right now, we're just looking at things that might not have a lot of literature collected in the same area, kind of like the article we reviewed last week in class. So this portion of the assignment talks about what your paper should include. This will be a written paper. So each group will submit 1 written paper. And I feel like you should know this, but a paper should have an introduction, the statement of the problem. This is where you're going to talk about your PICO question and the goals, your review of the clinical policy you chose. So I will need a description of what the policy entails, or at least the components that you're questioning. Then you're going to talk about your evaluation of your literature, your lit review, and then your recommendation for clinical practice, and then the conclusion. And the goal of the paper is to get you, it's multifaceted, right? I want you in the policies of your facility. It's so important that you learn to utilize those. I want you evaluating things from an evidence-based practice mindset. I want you thinking about what you're doing, not just doing like robots, right? Then I want you to be able to write like a baccalaureate degree nurse would, and then you'll present like a baccalaureate degree nurse would. So all of that is woven into the assignment, and so that's why the different components. What I want to show you though is that going through the PICO questions. So let me go back to assignments, and we're going to choose the evidence-based practice PICO question. So this gives more information. Again, it's going to just reiterate the important topics, right? Choose your group of students, identify a policy and procedure, and then you're evaluating, is the policy backed by evidence? The question cannot be, is this policy backed by evidence? Okay, what I'm asking you to do is to consider something that you've observed, read about, or participated in the practicum setting. And I'm going to give you an answer or an example of that. I'm sorry. I was reading on the slide here where you're going to formulate an answerable question. You're going to use one of these tools to develop that question. My favorite is the Johns Hopkins PICO tool worksheet. So I'm going to pull that up and we're going to go through it together, okay? So I'm going to give you an example problem and talk through this worksheet as if I were filling it out for this problem. Now, you're more than welcome to use this policy if you think it's relevant, but you can't use word for word what I'm writing, okay? So my group is going to gather and say, what are nurses telling us to do that maybe was different than what we learned in the lab, or different from what my instructor says I should be doing? So what is the problem and why is it important? Well, one thing that I've noticed at the clinical setting is that people don't label IV tubing. Some people are really strict about it. Heck, when I went to ICU, they had every single tubing labeled, not just with the date and time that it should be changed, but they had labels on the tubing that said what was in each tubing, right? So they were marked like normal saline or insulin or TPN or whatever. So I've seen a variety of tubing labels, and I don't know what is the best thing. And some people tell me it's really important because the patient could get sick, or I could mix medications, or I just need to know what direction I'm headed, right? In the CRC, they tell me I have to label tubing with a 72-hour change date, and the nurse I'm following changes it every 24 hours, and so she never labels her tubing. All of these would be a problem, right? You have to say, which problem are you worried about? So it could be IV tubing inconsistency, maybe the lack of consistency from one nurse to the other. Okay, maybe that's what my problem is. Another problem could be IV tubing isn't labeled and we're replacing it every time a new nurse takes over, and we're costing the patient a lot of money. So you see, you have to decide what the problem is in order to focus on it. So then you're going to say, what is the current practice? Number 2 is the policy. So maybe the issue is that they don't have a policy, and then that would be concerning, right? So that would be a great example of this project. You could recommend them to implement a policy. But if St. Joe's has an IV change policy, I would say the policy states change IV tubing every 96 hours if it's this, or this. If it's TPN, insulin, or propofol, it needs to be changed every 24 hours. And then you could even say not being followed consistently, or nurses seem unaware of it. Okay, for number 3, you're going to say, what is the focus of this problem? This sounds like it could be a clinical policy, right? It's focused on patient care. Maybe the policy seems legit and the nurses just don't know about it. So maybe it's educational. So you get to choose. For this assignment, we're going to keep it either clinical or educational. Well, I guess you could have administrative. It just wouldn't probably be as fun for you. And then you're going to say, how was this problem identified? So maybe it was you that you're seeing variations in practice within the setting, right? Or you'll say, well, they told us in lab we need to change it every 72 hours. And so you're saying, I want to see evidence that validates the current practice. So you can check all of these or one of these, but you have to check at least one. Then you're going to choose the scope of the problem. So this one sounds like it would be institution-wide, right? And then you're going to outline the PICO components using this information above. So for the IV tubing question, what are the components? So let's just say my patients or my population or my setting would be the acute care setting. And maybe I saw it the worst in ICU. Okay, so I'll say the critical care setting. My intervention would be frequency of tubing changes, IV tubing changes. My comparison would be no tubing changes or lack of consistency. And then the outcome might be decrease adverse effects for patients, maybe decrease patient cost or patient safety, right? Could be medications are getting mixed up because they're inconsistent. What could be decreased infections. So you have to decide what outcome you want to look at. But you're looking at the problem, okay? Not just the policy. And then you're going to develop your initial evidence-based practice question. So I would put something like this. Does labeling IV tubing in critical care settings create safer practice and fewer complications, maybe patient complications, than not labeling? Okay, so you'll write out the question in an answerable way after you develop these components. And then you're going to list your possible search terms. So I need you to identify for me how you're going to look for this. So if it's critical care, acute, hospital, something like that for the P. For the I, it would be tubing, IV tubing, or maybe intravenous or medication administration. So you're going to list out your possible search terms. And then you're going to talk about what evidence you need to gather. I want you to do a literature search and guidelines or expert opinion. You could put quantitative or qualitative. Remember, any of those terms that you add will help you in your search for good materials. I will tell you that we have research librarians, you met one last semester, whose job is to help you do research. So you can set up an appointment with a research librarian by going on the LCSC website, choosing the library, and just setting it up there. They are utilizing Zoom sessions for all of their meetings currently, and so they're happy to meet with you. Definitely meet with them. I want your groups to come up with a policy. That's not my job to do that for you. If you're struggling on what you're caring for, it's probably because you're not talking as a group, right? There has to be one of you who has an opinion on practice in the clinical setting right now. I can get you some information on potential policies if you want, but I'm not going to give you the policy that I want you to look at. This project has been done before, and so there are students who might be able to provide you insight as well. This PICO question is due Friday, so the 18th. I think it's at 5 p.m., right? No, it's by the end of the day. So I need you to be spending time on this, and just let me know if you need help, all right? I'll record a session about the presentations in the future, but this should get you going for now. All right, best of luck. Let me know if you have questions after you read the assignment. Thanks.